be prejudiced. For an example, you might have two people. Person one might have a negative attitude toward that particular group, but might own a particular store, let's say within an African American community, and want to hire people to work there. And although they are prejudiced toward that group of people, they might have an economic gain. Their friend might be just as prejudiced toward that same ethnic group, and they might want to avoid, and actually at their place of business, put in a practice of not hiring that person to actually work there. They are being very discriminating. The point I want to make, according to Dr. Allport, is that both people are very prejudiced. One will act in one way, and the other person will act in the other way, but they are both very prejudiced. This is why I want to try to make the observation that's going on in a political campaign of an entire group of people that might have a leader that they are now saying, well, gee, that person is saying something that I really think. And while at one point they may not have expressed it out loud, now they're willing to show up and to express it, because there are those two types of people that might have a dislike for certain policies or other group of people, but might act out their prejudice openly because they feel that someone else is a billionaire or in a leadership role and can say and act in that way, that so can I.
And so in real sense, Dr. Sanford, as we get ready to end this segment this morning, we're saying that prejudice has an impact upon all of us. A person can either be prejudiced or not prejudiced, but whatever his attitude might be, he's going to live within a community of folks that will have an impact. And we're going to talk this morning about some of the acts of prejudice. And what we'll do, we'll take our first commercial break, and we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break.
He has these 5 different acts of prejudice, and I want to kind of get through them. Then I want to be able to come back in that other segment and spend time and see what's going on with groups of people who might belong to a police force, that might be real cordial, might go to church to people, but they still might have that prejudice attitude, and they may not act in the church toward it, but they might be a police officer and see someone and then act in that way. Okay,
and what I have to do is to bring us back into this second segment and let you give that out.
That's right.
You don't want to confuse me with too much information.
Just those acts on prejudice. That's where you ended out.
Yeah, the acts on.
We're gonna come back. We're gonna hit it.
Yeah,
and I was hoping I did an okay job in setting up how you can have two people, just in two different people.
Yeah, well, that's two different.
They could be friends and one. Will act on it and discriminate.
Everybody is impacted by prejudice one way or the other.
That's it.
You see, and so either you are or you know some of your friends are.
That's right.
And you have to deal with that. Very good. All set. Well, I think thank you, and welcome back to the second segment of the show for today. The topic is Acts of Prejudice, Prescription for Racism, and the guest is Dr. EKSanford from Tennessee State University. And Dr. Sanford, during this second segment, let's give you an opportunity to lay out for our audience this morning some of the things that you consider to be acts of prejudice, and that will give us an opportunity to further lead this segment and then go into the next segment and develop some of the things that you're going to talk about during this segment.
Okay. Yes, again, and a prejudice is a negative attitude that a person or group of people might have toward another, a dislike. And as we stated in the last segment, to kind of follow up just briefly, is that they might have this dislike and not really link that to the way they may think or feel or be unaware of it. Dr. Gordon Allport, in his classic book entitled The Nature of Prejudice, he has 5 different levels of acts of prejudice. The first one he calls, it's a funny word, he calls antilocution. And antilocution is just a word that he means that a group of people may gather and they might hear someone and they might say, well, yes, I really believe in what that person is saying. And they might listen to it, they might come back to the second and third meeting about it, but they are not at that particular point willing to go out and to do anything other than just listen to it and agree to it. Now, the second level of an act on prejudice is that of avoidance. Dr. Gordon Allport said that a segment of that first group might go out and say, I want to avoid, because I have a dislike toward another group, and maybe to live someplace, maybe because I have financial assistance, I can live and not integrate with other people, and I can desegregate myself, I can segregate myself from other people. That's avoidance, when you can just want to stay away from that other group. You have that dislike and that negative attitude. Don't want to have anything to do with it. Then the third level of it is that of discrimination. Now, I want you to see that second, you don't want to have anything to do with them, but you might not do anything negative against them. But that third level is a subgroup of people that might not want to have anything to do with the person, but they will actually discriminate against an individual.
Find themselves in a situation where they have to deal with that group.
Yes,
is that what
that's right. Or if they have to hire, or if they are working in a particular place, they might see that a particular person is checked that they are of a particular ethnic group, and then they might do something that is discriminatory toward that group. So that's an act on prejudice, because you, in your mind, have this attitude about a person that you might not even know, but this dislike, and you might act on it in a very discriminatory way. We can look at history and our laws that at one time said that people that of a certain ethnic group would have to live in a certain area, they couldn't go to certain schools, and so an entire civil rights movement had to take place for those changes to come about. Even those that are listening might think, well, oh, institutions just always wanted to be fair in having athletics, but a movement had to go to have a certain title to be changed for women to have the right to play sports, because they were discriminated against. So then he looks at the next level of acts on prejudice, is that a physical attack.
Okay.
That's when they have this negative attitude toward this other group, that they're not only wanting to avoid and to discriminate, but they're going to organize themselves to actually go out and to then physically attack another group. We might remember the dark history in America where the Ku Klux Klans may have gone out and burned houses down, crosses, very intimidating. And that was a physical attack. And then the fifth level is called extermination. That's an act of prejudice where you're so racist toward another group of people, you target them and try to really do away with the entire group. That's extermination.
Physical extermination.
Physical extermination. Yes, you were just clearly trying to do it, and we can see that's the reason of World War II, because of what happened in Nazi Germany. Those types of things occurred. So we have those types of examples of acts of prejudice that is within our society today. Now, what I wanted to try to share that for is simply this. Presently, we have a reoccurring pattern that exists within our society of different groups of people that might be a part of antilocution, and they might work well with others, but when they go out into the workforce and they meet someone that might be a particular suspect, something in the subconscious might move them from the antilocution to the whole idea of a physical attack. And then they might unwantingly shoot that person or kill that person. And they would see some things that really didn't happen to try to justify it. But this is the same type of incident when people get together and say, well, we're going to really go to a place in an organized way and do something to some people. So now we're in a society where some people are feeling victimized by this peculiarity of acts on prejudice that might be at the level of antilocution, where they might do a little bit of the avoidance within the workplace and stay away. And then people there might leave with a certain feeling, and that person that avoided might not think they did anything toward that other person at all. And then they might even have a little discrimination that might be going on in the workplace, and everybody might meet and have a donut or coffee, but that person might get this feeling that they are not accepted. And now they will then have some of these acts of prejudice where they might move to then do some physical attacks, because what they have personally felt is going on in their life, that they went to school, they tried to assimilate, they've learned the language of the dominant group, they're dressing like the dominant group, and they're still not being treated fairly. And then they might go out and then be in a postmodernist age, have some thoughts about something they see in cyberspace Facebook or whatever, that might make them make a decision to go out and do a physical attack about some other attack that was done against them. So it becomes this kind of an integration of something that is going on that's an act on prejudice that moved into a physical attack by another person that might not think they did it, but they actually did it to that individual.
And so in a real sense, Doctor, we're saying that sociologically,
yes,
that a person can not have a prejudiced bone in his body, but his relationship with other folks, the kind of conversations that he becomes involved in, can move him from that first act up to the last act simply by the environment and the things that he hears that are said in reference to that group or that individual. Is that what we're saying?
That's what we are saying, and we are not saying 100% of that group. We are saying that in that antilocution, going back to if we can just observe what's going on before us in a national level at political campaigns, how you might have an entire group that might get at the same group that would have done physical attacks. Number 4, Ku Klux Klan, David Duke. Others that will show up because they are feeling depressed within the economic system that they are in, and they are all at the same place. Some will lash out while some will not.
Okay, very good. And what we're going to do, we're going to take this second commercial break, and we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. A situation where he might run across that first stage, and by simply being in that group, he can move from one stage up to another, from not knowing anything about him to now you want to kill him.
Yes.
Is that I said that's a real progression.
And this is what I'm seeing with Donald Trump and his group. See, I don't think anything is wrong with Donald Trump. I think he knows that that group is out there, and then when he says that, his polls keep going up and up. So he started using that language over and over again.
Make that as a point. That's
a
point. That's a good point. Yeah. Okay. Thank you and welcome back to the final segment of the show for today. The topic is Acts of Prejudice, Prescription for Racism. And we have with us to talk about acts of prejudice and the prescription for racism, Dr. EKSanford from Tennessee State University. And so, Dr. Sanford, let's see if we can finish this last segment by having you make some comments in reference to an individual who might be caught within that first act that you're talking about, and as he or she moves up and eventually move to the 5th act in which they are ready to exterminate an individual. Go on, speak to it from that perspective.
And thank you very much. And that is indeed how Dr. Gordon Allport would see it. That first person that might have this feeling or dislike toward another group but wouldn't act on it could be potentially a part of going into membership or just going to a group, and when things are being said, they might listen to it and agree with it and vote for it, but a subgroup of that group might move on to the next level, and then the next level to the next level of physical attack, where they might make a decision to go out and do it. Now, this is where the prescription for racism of those earlier attacks, the listening audience need to understand. When that group of people start to go out and they seek out a group of people, whoever they might be, based on certain physical characteristics or where they might be socially located within a community, that they know they are targeting that group of people, or if in a hiring process they are not allowing a group of people based on the ethnic group that they have checked that they are, or gender that they are, then that's when the racism or the sexism enters into the discussion about the whole prescription of racism within the society in which we live in. Now, when we look in our larger problems of reoccurring patterns of, say, police officers that are disproportionately killing African-American males, I want us to keep in mind this act on prejudice, because I think if we interviewed, say, any other officers in the rank and file line, all of them would say, well, no, we would not go out and act toward any other citizen in any different way than we would another person. But out of that group, you can have someone that in their private life would avoid, and then in their private life would do some discriminatory acts. And this becomes a part of their subconscious, looking at the social psychology of it. And when they are out in the force, and then when they are out to stop someone, that individual may not be doing anything that is being degrading or not following the rules. Or even if they were not following the rules and you have to shoot them, do you have to shoot to kill, or could you shoot in the leg and they fall down and then they couldn't do anything? But is there something in that physical attack that emerges from how some of the preceding acts of prejudice may have been in the environment as you grew up that might cause you then to shoot to kill, or after you're down to continue to shoot 15 additional times?
And so in a real sense, if you've got a group, hypothetically,
Yes.
of 20 people,
Yes.
and as they move from one stage
Yes.
to another, you might have only, 15 move up to that second stage, and then 10 to that third stage, and 5 to that fourth stage. And that fifth stage, in which there is an idea of extermination, you have only 1 or 2 out of those 20, but all might be considered to be what? Prejudice, but they've moved from one stage to another stage.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And now, as we are seeing this radicalization of other groups that are probably experiencing within the society or system in which we live in, some of those acts of the lesser stage of prejudice, they may then start thinking, how can I get back at that by this physical attack? So, and then I guess my point is, it can go from one ethnic group to the next ethnic group, or I hate to use this word, Uncle Tom, sometimes you can find people within one ethnic group that the dominant group can get another person to act and behave and think and say things in a certain way. I guess you want to say they've been bought out, or they may have assimilated to a certain degree that they may not try to understand that particular ethnic group, although they belong to that ethnic group themselves. However, going back to this issue of the problem that we are seeing in our society today, many people that might be the victims of it are now turning that into another type of act on prejudice and physically attacking. So I hate to date it, but as we have this conversation, there have been many types of attacks that have occurred in America and throughout the other country, and some people in their minds may be acting this thing out in a more physical, or to the point of exterminating another group of people, or the idea that another, even entire society, they could, regardless of who is in the building, if they are just called American, they want to get rid of them. So that's an extermination, an act on prejudice as well. So
would you say, Dr. Sanford, that many individuals do have an opportunity? It's really a decision that an individual has to make as to whether he is willing to move from level 1 to level 2 to the final level. That is really an individual's decision, but it's sort of formed by the group itself, by the kind of folks that you're involved with. Would that be a correct assessment of
that? That is very, very correct. And one of the things, since we are in higher education, is to try to have diversity in education, so that that group that's, because of legal segregation hundreds of years ago, things are still pretty much that way today, or people might still be separated and might have those attitudes, that through a system of education, that they will change their attitudes and values in a different way. And we have indeed seen that. We've seen that with the millennials, and how our Supreme Court now allows this discrimination that was going toward gay brothers, lesbian sisters of being married. Now they changed that law because there was a change in people's attitudes that were born in the 80s and the 90s. And so the same thing with the civil rights movement, when there was an act of prejudice, of discrimination, as well as physical attack, with a social movement that went on and on, laws were changed. And now supposedly there are improvements to the point that we have a first African-American president, two-term president. So we see change with the whole infusion, but you have to understand that those things are there. And this places someone in a high authority level to have to understand that much of the anti-locution is still very present, that first level within our society, of people just feeling in a very prejudiced way. And you can see within the political campaign that's going on at the very present time, when a person figures out there's a whole group of people regardless of their education, economic status, they might feel depressed or suppressed, and they might start thinking in a way, and then they go out and they meet and they rah-rah about it. So you can see some of the people with their flags up and everything that might
ready to move to the next section.
That's
next step of it. And so it's a thing of progression, you know, and if a person can exclude himself or get away from that kind of thing, he won't have an opportunity to progress. But as long as he is involved in the middle of it, he goes up with the rest of the group. Is that what we're saying?
That's what we're saying. And we think we have a better America with more diversity, because we'll strengthen numbers, strengthen everybody being along and getting along. And we have the institution of religion that's supposed to help everybody have this type of ethic about ourselves. But the question becomes, as Max Weber would say in his classic book, the Protestant ethic in the spirit of capitalism. How does capitalism prevent us from being able to get along?
And so in a real sense, diversity is the most important element in terms of bringing people together, and more diversified a group is, then the less likely they are to be able to move from, they might move from level 1 to level 2, but if there's quite a bit of diversity, they're not going to go up to level 5.
That's right. And intellectual diversity. You can live in another area, but intellectually you have to understand about the culture of other people, and then that would let you have a different level of respect, that you would not move into wanting to be discriminatory because intellectually. That's why we want in schools to have a diversified curriculum from kindergarten all the way through the 12th grade and through undergrad. So if you lived in an isolated area, you still have some intellectual awareness about diversity.
And Dr. Sanford, we're getting ready to end this show for today, but let me thank you for bringing that excellent information, because I think that it sort of demonstrates some of the things that we see. The more people become involved with discrimination, the more they are likely to not have any problems with discrimination. But if they become involved with diversity, they're going to become more diversified. You see, and I think that's good information, and I appreciate it, and I thank you. And let me encourage our audience to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you, and good morning.